At 5:42 a.m., I watched my husband kneel beside my suitcase and slip a small sealed box inside it while he thought I was still asleep in bed, and I remember thinking either I was dreaming or my life had just shifted without anyone telling me. I didn't move. I didn't even breathe right at first. The bedroom was still dark except for that thin gray light coming through the blinds, the kind of early Ohio morning where everything looks quieter than it really is. Columbus always has that heavy stillness before sunrise, like the whole city is holding its breath. Mark thought I was asleep. I could tell by the way he moved, careful, practiced, almost gentle. He zipped the suitcase slowly, like he wanted to erase what he'd just done. Then he stood there for a second, just looking at it before he grabbed his phone off the nightstand and left the room. I stayed perfectly still for maybe a full minute after he walked out. My heart wasn't pounding like in the movies. It was worse than that. It was controlled, cold, like my body already knew this wasn't a misunderstanding. Mark Bennett had been my husband for 12 years. We lived in a 2-story house in a quiet subdivision outside Columbus, nothing fancy, just the kind of place where people wave when they mow their lawns and argue politely about property lines. He worked in regional sales for a medical supply company. Good salary, good benefits, always on the road for meetings. And me, I worked part-time at a local library branch in Westerville. I liked the quiet. I liked knowing where things were. Or at least I used to. That morning we were supposed to fly to Chicago for a company conference. Mark had insisted on packing efficiently the night before, which I now realized wasn't helpful at all. It was controlled. I finally got out of bed after he left and stood in front of that suitcase like it might explain itself. Black rolling Samsonite. Mine. The one I'd used for years. And inside it something I hadn't put there. I didn't open it right away. That surprised me even more than what I saw. Instead, I just sat down on the edge of the bed and tried to think like I used to think about Mark. Logical. Fair. Not suspicious. Maybe it was a gift, something for the conference. Maybe he mixed up bags. But I knew Mark, and more importantly, I knew the way he had looked at his phone before leaving the room. That wasn't forgetfulness. That was timing. By the time I heard him downstairs, I had already decided not to confront him yet. That decision didn't come from bravery. It came from something else, confusion mixed with a feeling I didn't fully trust yet. I needed to see more before I reacted. That was the only clear thought I had. When I came downstairs, he was in the kitchen acting normal. Too normal. Coffee brewing, toast popping up, humming a little like he always did when he was trying to look relaxed. Morning, he said, like nothing had happened. Morning, I answered. I watched him closely. His shirt was crisp. Navy button-down sleeves rolled just right. Hair still damp from the shower. The same man I'd married. Except something about him felt staged, like he was performing a version of himself he thought I'd accept without question. He slid a mug toward me. Big day. Flight's at 9:30. We should leave by 7:30 to be safe. I nodded like I agreed, like my entire world wasn't already tilted. We ate breakfast in silence for a few minutes. Just the sound of silverware and the low hum of the refrigerator. I kept thinking about that box. Small, sealed. No label I could see. Not heavy. Not light enough to ignore either. Finally, I said casually, "What's in Chicago again? I keep forgetting the agenda." He didn't even look up. Vendor presentations, networking, you know how it is. That was Mark's favorite kind of answer. Technically correct, emotionally empty. Then, almost as an afterthought, he added Dana's going too. That name landed differently than I expected. Dana Collins, his secretary. Early 30s, always polished, always smiling too much when she came by the office Christmas party last year. I remembered her laugh more than I wanted to. "Oh," I said, keeping my tone flat. "Yeah, she's helping coordinate meetings, makes things smoother." Smooth. That word again. Mark liked things smooth, predictable, controlled. I nodded again like it didn't matter, like I didn't feel something tighten in my chest. After breakfast, he went upstairs to double-check emails. I stayed at the table longer than I needed to, staring at the half-empty mug in front of me. My reflection in the dark coffee looked older than I felt. That's when I made my first real decision of the day. I got up, walked upstairs, and quietly opened the bedroom door. The suitcase was still there. I knelt beside it. For a moment, I just listened, our house settling, the faint sound of a neighbor's garage door, distant traffic from the highway. Normal life continuing like nothing unusual was happening. Then I unzipped the suitcase. The box was real. Small, wrapped tightly in plain brown tape. No markings, no explanation. It didn't look dangerous. It didn't look important. And that somehow made it worse. My hands hovered over it for a few seconds. I didn't open it. I didn't shake it. I just studied it like it might reveal intent if I stared long enough. I kept thinking, why me, why my bag? That question stuck. Because if Mark was hiding something, the choice of where to put it wasn't random. I zipped the suitcase back up and stood there feeling something settle in me that I didn't have a name for yet. Downstairs I heard him call my name. Ready soon. I looked at the suitcase one last time. I'm ready, I said. But I wasn't. Not even close. And by the time I rolled that suitcase toward the door, I had already made another decision, one I hadn't fully admitted to myself yet. If Mark thought I was going to carry his secret onto that plane, he was wrong. By the time we pulled out of our subdivision in Westerville, the morning had fully settled in. The sky was that washed-out Ohio gray, the kind that makes everything look slightly tired before the day even begins. Mark drove one hand on the wheel, the other resting near the gear shift like he didn't have a single worry in the world. I sat in the passenger seat, my suitcase in the back of the SUV beside his. 2 black bags, almost identical. Same brand, same size, same little scuff mark near the corner zipper that I'd always meant to clean off. It should have felt ordinary, it didn't. Mark kept talking about the conference like nothing else existed. Big networking opportunity, he said. Lot of decision makers. Could open a few doors for Q3. I nodded, making the right sounds in the right places. But my attention wasn't on his words. It was on his phone, which kept lighting up in his lap. Each buzz made his thumb move faster. I caught one name flash across the screen when he wasn't careful enough. Dana. Of course. At the airport, everything moved like a script I'd seen too many times before. Long-term parking shuttle rolling suitcases, people half awake clutching coffee like lifelines. The smell of airport coffee alone could tell you half the country was running on fumes and obligation. Mark was unusually upbeat. He even kissed my cheek in the parking garage before we unloaded the luggage. You okay? He asked. Fine, I said. That word has never cost me so much. Inside the terminal, we headed toward TSA pre-check. Mark kept slightly ahead of me like he was guiding a group not walking with his wife. Dana was already there when we arrived, standing near the checkpoint in a beige trench coat, scrolling her phone. She looked up when Mark approached, smiled too quickly, then glanced at me like she'd just remembered I existed. Morning, she said. Morning, I replied. Mark didn't notice the pause between us. Or maybe he did and didn't care. We placed our bags on the conveyor belt. I remember watching mine go first, then his, then Dana's, 3 black suitcases sliding forward like they belonged to the same story. Except I already knew they didn't. And that was when I saw my opening. Mark leaned down to adjust his shoe. Dana stepped away to answer a call. The TSA agent wasn't paying attention for half a second because a family ahead of us was arguing about liquids. That was all I needed. I walked casually to the belt like I was just checking something. No rush, no hesitation. My heartbeat stayed steady, which honestly scared me more than if I'd been panicking. I reached out and grabbed the handle of my suitcase just as it cleared the initial scanner area. Then I stopped. Because next to it, Dana's identical bag was rolling through the same track, just one position behind. My mind did something very simple in that moment. It didn't ask moral questions. It didn't debate consequences. It just connected dots. Mark had put something in my suitcase before sunrise. Dana was coming on the same trip. And those 2 facts suddenly felt too connected to ignore. I didn't open anything. I didn't even slow down. I simply switched the luggage tags in one smooth motion and swapped the positions of the 2 bags as casually as if I were correcting a mistake in grocery bags. To anyone watching, it would have looked like nothing. A traveler adjusting her belongings. But inside, I felt like I had just crossed a line I couldn't uncross. My hands were slightly shaking by the time I walked back to Mark. He looked at me. Everything okay? I nodded, just checking something. He smiled, distracted. You're always organized. That's why I love you. That sentence almost broke something in me. Almost. We made it through TSA without issue. Shoes off, laptops out, the usual routine. Dana ended up ahead of us after screening, and Mark immediately fell into step beside her like a habit he didn't think twice about. I followed behind. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't sure what role I was supposed to play in my own marriage. At the gate, I sat slightly apart from them. Not enough to be obvious, just enough to observe. Mark and Dana were talking quietly. Not inappropriate on the surface, just too familiar, too practiced. She laughed at something he said, and he leaned in, slightly lowering his voice. I watched Dana's suitcase sitting near her feet, the one I had switched. That's when the doubt hit me. Not guilt, not yet, doubt. What if I misunderstood? What if this wasn't what I thought it was? What if I just turned a small private secret into a public disaster? My stomach tightened. I almost stood up right then and switched everything back. Almost. But then Mark checked his watch, looked at his phone again, and his face changed. Just slightly. Like someone had just reminded him of something urgent. He stood up suddenly. Boarding soon. I need to make a quick call. He walked away from the seating area. Dana stayed put. And that's when I heard it. Her phone rang. She answered, voice low. Yeah, I've got it with me. He said it's fine. I froze. He said it's fine. My eyes moved from her face to her suitcase. Something inside me shifted again. Mark came back a minute later, slightly tense now. He stood too still, scanning the gate area like he was looking for something that wasn't there. That's when I realized something I hadn't fully understood before. Whatever was in that box, it wasn't just mine anymore. Boarding Group 1 was called. We stood up, gathering our things. Mark reached for my suitcase without looking. I let him take it, and as he rolled it forward toward the gate, I followed behind him, thinking one clear, unsettling thought. If he planted a trap, I just moved it into someone else's hands. The moment we stepped onto the moving walkway toward the gate, I could feel something shift in the air, like the airport itself had tightened its grip on everything happening inside it. O'Hare wasn't chaotic in a loud way that morning. It was worse than that controlled chaos. People moving with purpose, announcements echoing in soft bursts, wheels of carry-ons rolling like distant thunder. Everything looked normal right up until it didn't. We reached Terminal 3 Gate C18 right on schedule. Mark was walking slightly ahead of me now, pulling my suitcase like it was just another routine detail of travel. Dana was a few steps to his right, scrolling through her phone again, occasionally glancing up at him like she was waiting for instructions. Only he understood. I stayed behind them both. That distance mattered more than I wanted to admit. We got through boarding verification without issue. The agent barely looked up, just scanned our phones and waved us forward. That's when I felt it, the smallest flicker of relief I didn't trust. Because I knew enough about mornings like this. The quiet ones always broke later. We entered the pre-boarding area, and that's when TSA secondary security suddenly changed tone. It started with a radio crackle near the checkpoint, then a sharp hand signal between two officers. Then a dog handler stepping forward too quickly. I noticed it before anyone else in our group did. A suitcase had been flagged, not just randomly stopped, actively pulled aside. And it wasn't mine anymore. It was Dana's. The same black suitcase I had switched at the belt. My throat went dry before my brain fully processed what that meant. An officer placed a bright orange tag on the handle. Secondary screening, he said flatly. Dana frowned. Is there a problem? No need to worry yet, the officer replied, which is exactly what makes people worry. Mark stopped walking. Just stopped. That alone told me more than anything else. Whose bag is that? Another officer asked. Dana lifted her hand slightly. Mine. Mark immediately stepped forward. No. The word came out too fast, too sharp. Every head near the gate turned. The officer looked at him. Sir. Mark hesitated, just a fraction of a second, but I saw it. That hesitation was the first crack. That's not hers, Mark said, voice tightening. That's actually... He stopped again. And that second silence changed everything, because now he had nowhere safe to place the sentence. Dana turned toward him. Mark, what are you talking about? I stood still behind them, watching it unfold like a slow collapse. The TSA officer raised a hand. Everyone stepped back. Passengers nearby were now watching openly. Phones started to come out. You could feel the shift from routine airport morning to something people would later describe to friends as, "You won't believe what I saw at O'Hare." A supervisor arrived within seconds. "Open the bag," she said. Dana's voice sharpened. "I don't know what's going on here, but that's my suitcase. I packed it myself last night." Mark looked like he was trying to calculate 10 different outcomes at once and failing every single one. Then the zipper came open. The box. Still sealed. Still exactly as Mark had placed it. But now sitting inside the wrong story. The officer pulled it out carefully. "What is this?" No one answered immediately. Then Mark spoke too quickly again. It's not supposed to be there." That was the wrong sentence, because not supposed to be there is exactly what gets people taken aside in airports. The supervisor turned slightly. "Sir, step over here." Mark's head snapped toward me for the first time. Not Dana. Me. And in that look, something shifted from confusion to realization. He knew. He knew I had done something. I didn't move, I didn't smile, I didn't react at all. But I think that's when he understood the truth. This wasn't random anymore. This was controlled. Behind us, passengers were being redirected. Boarding was paused. And then, worse than all of it, the officer said the words that changed the entire direction of the morning. "We may need to bring this to a private screening room." Mark exhaled sharply. Dana looked like she was trying not to panic but losing the effort. And me, for the first time since 5:42 a.m., I wasn't guessing anymore. I wasn't confused. I was watching a plan I didn't fully design finally reveal its shape. Mark stepped closer to me, lowering his voice. "What did you do?" I met his eyes, and I said the only honest thing I could think of. "I didn't do anything. I just let your plan travel without me in it." His face went pale. And right there in the middle of Terminal 3 at O'Hare, I saw something I had never seen on Mark Bennett's face before. Fear that wasn't for me, but because of me. They didn't handcuff anyone in front of the gate, but the way the officers moved made it clear this wasn't going to end with a simple explanation and a shrug. "Sir, ma'am, this way," the supervisor said, motioning toward a side corridor behind the TSA checkpoint. Mark hesitated for half a second, like he was considering whether he could talk his way out of it right there in front of everyone. That used to be his thing. Smooth words, confident tone, a little smile that made people lower their guard. It didn't work this time. We were led into a small secondary screening room. Beige walls, fluorescent lights that buzzed faintly, a metal table bolted to the floor. The kind of room designed to make everyone feel like they've already lost control. Dana sat first, arms crossed tightly now. Her composure from the gate was gone. She kept looking between Mark and the officers like she was waiting for someone to finally explain why her name was even in this situation. Mark stood near the wall instead of sitting. That told me more about him than anything he could have said. I stayed slightly apart, not invited to sit, yet not told to leave either. Suspended in that uncomfortable space where you're both witness and suspect. The box was placed on the table. No one touched it for a moment. Then the supervisor looked at Mark. "You're going to explain what this is." Mark ran a hand over his mouth. Twice. A nervous habit I'd seen only a few times in 12 years, usually when numbers didn't add up on business reports. "It's not what it looks like," he said. Dana let out a sharp laugh. "That's what people say when it's exactly what it looks like." Mark shot her a look. "You don't understand." "That's becoming a pattern," she replied, voice shaking now. The officer cut in. "We can escalate this to federal authorities depending on content. So I suggest clarity." That word clarity seemed to break something open in Mark. He turned suddenly toward me. There it was again. That shift, from denial to accusation. "You did this?" he said quietly. Not loud, not dramatic, just certain. Dana looked at me too now, confusion turning into alarm. "I finally spoke. I saw you put something in my suitcase before we left the house." Silence. Even the officer paused. Mark's expression tightened. "You were asleep." "I wasn't," I said. That landed heavier than anything else in the room. Dana leaned forward. "Wait, what exactly is going on? Because I was told this was a normal trip." Mark exhaled sharply like he was trying to reset the situation. "This is a misunderstanding. I was just..." The supervisor held up a hand. "We're going to open the container." That stopped him cold. The box was opened carefully. Gloves, slow movements, the kind of precision that turns seconds into hours. Inside were documents, not dangerous materials, not what the worst-case scenario might have implied in a movie, but serious enough to change the tone instantly. Financial records, internal company transfers, and printed email chains that clearly weren't meant for public eyes. Dana's face changed immediately. "What is that?" Mark's breathing got shallow. I watched him closely now, and for the first time I saw the version of him he never showed at home. Not confident, not controlled, just cornered. The officer flipped through a few pages, expression tightening. "Sir, we're going to need your full cooperation. This may involve corporate fraud investigation." That word hit the room like a dropped plate. Fraud. Mark finally sat down slowly, like his body had given up on pretending. And that's when everything outside this room started to catch up to us. A knock at the door. Another officer entered, spoke quietly to the supervisor, then left again. The supervisor turned back to Mark. "Your company has been contacted." Dana stood up abruptly. No, I'm not part of this. I was told I was just assisting with scheduling, that's it. Mark didn't look at her. He looked at me, and this time there was no accusation left, just something closer to disbelief. You switched the bags, he said again, quieter. I nodded once, yes. No apology, no satisfaction, just truth. He let out a short laugh that had no humor in it. Do you have any idea what you just walked into? I answered honestly, no, but I know what you tried to put into mine. That shut him down. The officers began asking questions again, this time directed at all three of us. Who packed what? Who handled which bag? Who had access to company materials? Dana kept insisting she was misled. And from what I could see, she wasn't lying, she just had no idea she was part of anything bigger. And me, I had to explain everything carefully over and over while trying not to sound like a woman who had just accidentally detonated her entire marriage in an airport terminal. At some point, I realized something uncomfortable. I wasn't just the victim in this anymore. I was now part of the evidence chain. Hours passed in that small room. Phones taken, statements recorded, water cups that went untouched. Eventually, Mark was escorted out first for formal questioning with higher authorities. Dana followed soon after, shaking her head like she still couldn't believe her name was attached to any of this. And then it was just me, sitting there alone for a moment longer than I expected. A different officer finally spoke softly. You're not being detained, ma'am. You're free to go, but you may be contacted again. I nodded even though my hands were still cold. When I finally walked out of that room, the airport felt completely different. Same lights, same noise, same people rushing to gates. But nothing felt normal anymore. I stopped near a window overlooking the runway and just stood there for a moment. My suitcase was gone. My marriage technically was still intact in legal terms. But in reality, it had already left the gate long before the plane ever did. And the strangest part, I didn't feel victorious. I just felt awake. I took a rideshare home from O'Hare that evening. The driver asked me if I wanted music, and I told him no. I just watched Chicago slip away in the rearview mirror, the highway stretching out like nothing unusual had happened that day at all. But something had. Something permanent. By the time I got back to Westerville, Ohio, it was already dark. The house looked exactly the same as it always had, porch light on mail stacked neatly by the door, my neighbor's dog barking at nothing across the street. Normal life pretending to continue. Inside, everything felt quieter than it should have. Mark wasn't home. That didn't surprise me. What surprised me was how little I felt about it in the moment. No panic, no urgency, just a strange emptiness, like my emotions were still somewhere back at the airport trying to catch up. I set my bag down in the hallway and stood there for a while before moving. The silence in the house wasn't peaceful. It was aware. Like the walls knew something had changed even if they couldn't say it out loud. Later that night, I got a call from an unknown number. I almost didn't answer. But I did. It was brief. A calm voice identifying themselves as part of a corporate investigation team connected to Mark's employer. They told me Mark had been placed on administrative suspension pending review of internal financial documents and communications. They didn't use dramatic language, no judgment, just facts. Dana had already been cleared of wrongdoing but was cooperating fully. Her involvement, they said, appeared unintentional. Then came the line I didn't expect. Your cooperation at the airport was noted as significant in clarifying the chain of custody. Chain of custody. It sounded so distant from real life, like something that belonged in a report, not in a marriage. After I hung up, I sat at the kitchen table for a long time without turning on a light. That's when it really hit me, not in a dramatic way, but slowly. I hadn't planned any of this. I hadn't set out to expose anything or hurt anyone. I had just seen something that didn't make sense, and I didn't ignore it. That was the part I kept coming back to. Because if I was honest, the hardest moment wasn't at TSA or in that screening room, or even when Mark looked at me and realized I wasn't backing down. The hardest moment had been that split second in our bedroom when I chose not to look away. Over the next few days, things unraveled quietly. Mark stayed elsewhere. A hotel, I assumed. There were no dramatic confrontations at home, no shouting matches in the driveway like you see in movies. Just a slow, distant separation that neither of us seemed eager to interrupt. We exchanged one short conversation by text. Mark, this got out of control. Me, it didn't start that way. He didn't reply after that. I didn't expect him to. People always think closure comes from answers. But in my experience, it doesn't. It comes from finally seeing the shape of the truth clearly enough that you stop needing new explanations. A week later, I went to a small diner off Route 3 in Westerville. The kind of place where they still refill your coffee without asking, and the booths have that worn-down comfort that only comes from years of people sitting in them. I sat there for a long time just watching normal life again, families arguing softly over breakfast, retirees reading newspapers, a waitress calling people hon without thinking about it. Ordinary life felt different now, not fragile exactly, just honest. I thought about Mark, about Dana, about that box, and I realized something I didn't fully understand at the time it happened. The real break in my life didn't happen when I switched those suitcases. It happened the moment I stopped assuming I wouldn't need to question him. I'm not proud of how it unfolded. There's no clean satisfaction in it. No perfect victory. Just consequences, some deserved, some collateral. But I do know this: I didn't create the situation. I just refused to carry it quietly anymore. Before I left the diner, I wrote something small on a napkin and left it on the table. Not for anyone specific. Just a reminder to myself. Pay attention when things feel slightly off. That's usually where the truth starts. I walked out into the parking lot, pulled my coat tighter, and for the first time in a long time I felt like my own life was mine again. Even if it was still messy, still uncertain, still in pieces I hadn't fully put together yet. And maybe that's what real endings look like. Not closure. Just clarity you can finally live with. If this story made you think of a moment you almost ignored your own instinct, share it in the comments. Sometimes the smallest decisions change everything.